My name is Robert Hastings. I'm 58 years old, and I was sitting in a private dining room at Giovanni's, the Italian restaurant where my wife, Laura, and I had celebrated every anniversary for the past 32 years, watching my son Brandon throw a tantrum that would have been embarrassing from a 5-year-old, let alone a 30-year-old man. "Dad, you need to stop this right now," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. The veins in his neck stood out, his face flushed red. "This is Mom's anniversary dinner. You're making a scene." I looked at the folder in front of me, then at the 12 people seated around the table, my wife, our daughter Melissa and her husband Tom, Brandon and his wife Kimberly, Laura's sister and her family, and our closest friends who'd been celebrating this milestone with us for years. Everyone had stopped eating, forks suspended halfway to mouths, wine glasses frozen in midair. "Am I?" I asked calmly. Because from where I'm sitting, the scene was already made. I'm just bringing it into the light. Brandon's hands were shaking. Kimberly had gone pale, her eyes darting between her husband and me like she was watching a tennis match and didn't know which side would win. Let me back up. 3 months ago, I'd started noticing some irregularities. Small things at first. The family business, Hastings Manufacturing, which my father had started in 1968 and I'd taken over in 1995, had some accounting discrepancies. Nothing major, just a few $1,000s here and there that didn't quite add up. Our accountant, Margaret, had brought it to my attention during a quarterly review. "I'm probably being overly cautious," she'd said, sliding a printout across her desk. "But these transfers from the operating account don't match any invoices or payroll records I have. Do you know what they're for?" I'd looked at the dates and amounts. $3,500 on March 14th. $7,200 on March 28th. $4,800 on April 3rd. All listed as miscellaneous operational expenses with authorization codes that traced back to Brandon. Brandon had been working at Hastings Manufacturing since he'd graduated from college 8 years ago. I'd started him on the floor, like my father had started me, but he'd worked his way up to operations manager. He had access to certain accounts, the ability to authorize payments for supplies, equipment repairs, and vendor contracts. It was necessary for the position. I trusted him. "Let me look into it," I told Margaret. "Probably just poor documentation. I'll have Brandon clean up the records." But I didn't ask Brandon. Something in my gut told me to wait, to watch, to verify before confronting him. Maybe it was the memory of how he'd been acting lately. Distracted, irritable, making excuses to leave work early or take long lunches. Maybe it was the way Kimberly had looked when I'd seen them at the grocery store last month. Her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying, her smile forced when she'd greeted me. So I'd asked Margaret to pull records going back further, 6 months, a year, 2 years. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemicals. Small withdrawals at first, 3 years ago, $500 here, $800 there. Irregular enough not to raise flags, documented vaguely enough to slip past cursory audits. But over time, they'd grown, both in frequency and amount. In the past 3 years, approximately $247,000 had been transferred out of company accounts with Brandon's authorization, all labeled as operational expenses, none corresponding to actual business needs. $250,000. Gone. I'd spent 2 weeks verifying everything, cross-referencing every transaction, checking vendor records, reviewing legitimate operational expenses. Margaret had helped, quietly and discreetly. Every single one of the suspicious transfers was unauthorized. Every single one was theft. But theft for what? That was the question that kept me up at night. Brandon made a good salary, $95,000 a year plus bonuses. Kimberly worked as a dental hygienist, earning another $60,000. They lived in a nice but not extravagant house in the suburbs. They drove reasonable cars. They didn't take lavish vacations or wear designer clothes. Where was the money going? I'd hired a private investigator. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to know. The report had come back 3 days ago, and it confirmed my worst fears, while somehow being even worse than I'd imagined. Brandon was gambling. Not casually, not a friendly poker game with friends or occasional trips to the casino. He was gambling compulsively, desperately, destructively. Online poker sites, sports betting apps, 2 to 3 trips a week to the tribal casino 2 hours away, where he'd lose thousands of dollars in single sessions. The investigator had photos, timestamps, credit card statements that Brandon had been hiding from Kimberly in a separate bank account. The total known gambling losses over 3 years, approximately $280,000. More than he'd stolen from the company, which meant he'd also been draining his own accounts, his and Kimberly's savings, probably taking cash advances on credit cards and loans he'd hidden from everyone. I'd sat in my study reading that report, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, coached in Little League. The young man I'd welcomed into the family business with pride, thinking he'd carry on the legacy my father had started. And he'd been stealing from me, from the company, from his family's future, from the employees who depended on Hastings Manufacturing for their livelihoods, 53 families who trusted that the company would be there for them. Laura had found me in the study around midnight, the report spread across my desk. "Robert, are you coming to bed?" She'd seen my face, seen the papers, and her expression had shifted from curiosity to concern. "What's wrong?" I'd told her everything. She'd sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face as I walked her through the evidence. "How could he?" she'd whispered. "How could he do this to us? To the company? To his own family?" "I don't know," I'd said, my voice hollow. "But we need to deal with it." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to confront him. At the anniversary dinner." She'd looked at me sharply. "Robert, that's in 3 days. That's our celebration. Our family will be there, our friends." "Exactly," I'd interrupted. "It needs to be somewhere he can't run, can't deflect, can't make excuses and disappear. Somewhere he'll have to face what he's done, with witnesses who care about him." "That's cruel." "What's cruel is stealing from your family for 3 years to feed a gambling addiction while everyone around you thinks everything is fine." Laura had been quiet for a long time. Finally, she'd nodded. "Okay, but I'm sitting next to you. We do this together." Now, sitting in Giovanni's private dining room surrounded by people we loved, I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statements. The noise of the restaurant beyond our closed door felt distant, muffled. In our private space, the only sounds were the rustle of papers and Brandon's heavy breathing. "These are statements from the company accounts," I said, my voice steady despite the anger churning in my stomach. "Over the past 3 years, $247,000 has been transferred out with your authorization code, Brandon. None of these transfers correspond to actual business expenses." "Dad, I can explain." Brandon started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I've also received a report from a private investigator detailing your gambling activities over the same period. Casino visits, online poker accounts, sports betting. The losses total approximately $280,000, which means you weren't just stealing from the company. You were also draining your personal accounts, your savings, money that should have been securing your and Kimberly's future." Kimberly made a small sound, almost like a whimper. She was staring at Brandon with an expression of dawning horror. "You said the savings were for a down payment on a bigger house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said we were almost there. You said—" Her voice broke. "Kim, I was going to tell you. I was going to fix it." Brandon reached for her hand, but she jerked away from him. "Tell me what? That you've been lying to me for 3 years? That you've been gambling away our future? It wasn't like that. I had it under control. I had a system. A system? I interrupted. Is that what you call stealing from your family? From employees who depend on this company for their livelihoods? A system. Brandon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You have no idea what it's been like. The pressure of living up to the Hastings name, of working in that factory knowing everyone's comparing me to you, to Grandpa. I needed an outlet. I needed something that was mine. So you chose gambling, Melissa said quietly. My daughter had been silent until now, but her voice cut through Brandon's excuses like a knife. And when that didn't work out, when you started losing, you stole from the family business to cover your losses. I was going to pay it back, Brandon said, but his voice had lost its conviction. I had a plan. I just needed a few more months. A few more months. I pulled out another statement. In the past 3 months alone, you've taken $45,000. The amounts are increasing, Brandon. You're not getting better. You're getting worse. Laura's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. I could see tears on her cheeks, but her jaw was set firm. We'd agreed on this approach. Public confrontation, witnesses, no room for Brandon to wriggle out or make promises he wouldn't keep in private. I think, Tom said carefully, he was an attorney, and I'd briefed him before dinner about what was coming, that we need to talk about next steps. Brandon, what you've done is embezzlement. That's a criminal offense. Your father could press charges. He wouldn't, Brandon said, but he'd gone pale. Dad, you wouldn't do that to me. I'm your son. You're also a thief, I said, and the word hung in the air like poison. You stole from your family. From a company that's provided for 3 generations. From employees who've worked alongside you, who trusted you. Robert, Laura's sister said hesitantly, maybe this conversation should be private. The children. She gestured to her teenage kids, who were watching with wide eyes. No, I said firmly. This affects the whole family. Everyone at this table has a stake in Hastings Manufacturing. Everyone here deserves to know what Brandon has done, and what happens next. What does happen next? Kimberly asked, her voice stronger now, laced with anger. Because I sure as hell didn't know anything about this. I thought we were saving for a house. I thought we had $40,000 in savings. Are you telling me that's gone? Brandon wouldn't meet her eyes. Most of it. Most of it, she repeated. How much is left, Brandon? About 3,000. Kimberly stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. $37,000. You gambled away $37,000 of our savings. Money I've been putting away from every paycheck for 5 years. Money I thought was building our future. Kim, please. Don't. She held up her hand. Don't say my name. Don't touch me. Don't. Her voice broke, and she grabbed her purse. I need to leave. I can't be here right now. She walked out, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if she'd slammed it. Brandon started to follow, but I said sharply, sit down. She needs space, and you need to hear what comes next. He sat, looking smaller somehow, deflated. The anger had drained out of him, leaving something that looked like shame, or maybe just fear. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling out another document. Tomorrow morning, you're going to resign from Hastings Manufacturing. You're going to sign this agreement acknowledging the embezzlement and setting up a payment plan to return every dollar you took, plus interest. The payments will be automatically deducted from your unemployment benefits until you find new work, and then from your wages wherever you land. Dad, I need that job. I need the income to pay bills, to support. You should have thought about that before you stole $250,000, Melissa interjected. Did you think about your bills when you were betting thousands of dollars on football games? Did you think about supporting your wife when you were playing online poker until 3 in the morning? Brandon flinched. How do you know about? The investigator's report is very thorough, I said. It includes dates, times, locations, and amounts. Everything. Which brings me to the second part. You're going to enter a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. 60 days minimum. Tom has already researched facilities. You're going to complete the program, attend aftercare, and continue with therapy and support groups. I can't take 2 months off. I have responsibilities. You lost that argument when you embezzled from the family business, Tom said. His voice was neutral, but I could see the anger in his eyes. Tom had worked his way through law school, built his career through discipline and hard work. He had no patience for people who threw away advantages through poor choices. If you complete the treatment and stick to the payment plan, I continued, I won't press criminal charges. You'll have a chance to rebuild your life, to fix your marriage, if Kimberly will have you, and to eventually restore some trust with this family. But if you refuse treatment, violate the payment agreement, or if I discover you've gambled even once, I'll turn everything over to the police and let the criminal justice system handle it. You'd really do that? Brandon looked at me with something like disbelief. You'd really send your own son to prison? I'd really hold my son accountable for his actions, I corrected. Those are different things. Right now, you have a choice, treatment and restitution or criminal charges. What's it going to be? The silence stretched. Laura's friends were staring at their plates, uncomfortable with the family drama playing out in front of them. Laura's sister was quietly crying. Melissa was watching her brother with an expression I couldn't quite read, disappointment mixed with something that might have been pity. This is blackmail, Brandon finally said. No, Tom interjected. Blackmail would be demanding something in exchange for not reporting a crime. Your father is offering you an alternative to prosecution. That's called mercy, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Brandon's hands were shaking. He pulled out his wallet, extracted 3 credit cards, and threw them on the table. Fine. Take them. Take everything. I'm done. That's not an answer, I said. I need to hear you say it. Treatment or prosecution? Choose. His jaw worked. For a moment, I thought he might actually choose prosecution, might actually be so stubborn, or so far gone, that he'd rather face criminal charges than admit he had a problem and needed help. Treatment. He finally said, the word barely audible. I need you to be clear. I need everyone at this table to hear you commit. He looked up and met my eyes. I'll go to treatment. I'll sign the payment plan. I'll do what you're asking. Not what I'm asking. What's required for you to begin fixing what you've broken? He nodded, looking down at his hands. I pulled out the agreement Tom had drafted and slid it across the table with a pen. Sign it. Now, with everyone here as witnesses. Brandon picked up the pen with shaking hands and signed his name at the bottom of the document. Tom witnessed it, then passed it to Laura Melissa and her husband to witness as well. When everyone had signed, I folded it carefully and put it back in the folder. Treatment starts Monday, I said. Tom will send you the facility information tomorrow. Pack what you need. The program is covered by company insurance, so that's one thing you won't have to worry about. What about Kim? Brandon asked quietly. What do I tell her? The truth, Laura said, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. You tell her everything. You apologize. You beg her forgiveness. And you accept that she might not give it. She's going to leave me. She might, Laura agreed. You've given her every reason to. But that's the consequence of your choices, Brandon. You did this. You have to live with whatever comes next. Brandon stood slowly, looking around the table at all the faces watching him. Family, friends, people who'd known him his whole life. I'm sorry, he said, but it sounded hollow, like he was saying what he thought he should say rather than what he felt. Don't apologize to us, I said. Apologize to Kimberly. Apologize to the employees whose livelihoods you put at risk. Apologize to yourself for wasting 3 years of your life on something so destructive. Then do better. He nodded and walked out, leaving his credit cards on the table like abandoned weapons. After he left, nobody spoke for a long moment. The anniversary dinner, that was supposed to be a celebration, had turned into something else entirely. The pasta was cold on the plates, the wine losing its chill in the glasses, the cake we'd ordered still waiting to be brought out. "I'm sorry," I said finally, addressing everyone at the table. "I'm sorry this had to happen tonight, during what should have been a happy occasion. But it needed to happen somewhere Brandon couldn't run, couldn't hide behind excuses." "You did the right thing," Laura's sister said, wiping her eyes. "It's brutal, but it's right." "What happens to the company?" one of our friends asked. "The money he took. Will Hastings Manufacturing be okay?" "We'll survive," I said. "We have reserves, and insurance will cover some of it. We'll need to tighten our belts, maybe delay some planned expansions. But we'll survive. The employees' jobs are safe." "And Brandon?" Melissa asked. "Do you really think treatment will work?" "I don't know," I admitted. Gambling addiction is serious. It rewires the brain, creates patterns that are hard to break. But he has to try. If he doesn't, he'll lose everything: his marriage, his family, eventually his freedom if he turns to other illegal activities to fund the gambling. "He might lose all that anyway," Tom observed. "Yes, but at least this way, he'll have had a chance." Laura squeezed my hand again. "Let's eat something. The food's getting cold, and wasting a perfectly good anniversary dinner won't help anyone." So we ate, though nobody had much of an appetite. We made awkward small talk, avoiding the elephant that had just been dragged through the room. When the cake came, Laura and I cut it together and smiled for photos we all knew would never make it into any album. We were going through the motions because sometimes that's all you can do: maintain the forms of normalcy even when everything has broken. I drove home with Laura in silence. She stared out the window, her hand in mine, neither of us willing or able to put words to what we were feeling. At home, I poured us each a glass of whiskey, and we sat on the back porch, looking out at the yard my father had helped me landscape 30 years ago, when Laura and I bought this house and started building our life together. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked finally. "Yes," Laura said without hesitation. "It was hard. It was public. But he would have kept stealing, kept gambling, kept destroying everything if you hadn't stopped him. I feel like I failed him somehow. Like I should have seen it sooner, should have done something." "Robert." She turned to face me. "Brandon is 30 years old. He's an adult. He made his own choices. You can't take responsibility for that. I'm his father. And you're being a good father by forcing him to face consequences. That's what parents do. We don't shield our children from the results of their actions. We help them learn to be better." I wanted to believe that. But sitting there in the dark, holding my wife's hand, I felt like I'd lost something irreplaceable tonight. Not money. Money could be recovered. Not even the business, which would weather this storm. But something deeper. The image I'd had of my son, maybe, or the future I'd imagined for him. My phone buzzed. A text from Kimberly. "Thank you for telling me. I'm staying with my sister tonight. I don't know what happens next, but I needed you to know I appreciate you being honest with me, even though it had to be in front of everyone." I showed Laura the text. She read it and nodded. "That's good. She deserves better than what Brandon gave her." Should I have told her privately first? Maybe, but if you had, she might have tried to convince you to give him another chance to handle. Another text, this time from Melissa. "Dad, I know tonight was awful, but you did the right thing. Brandon needed someone to love him enough to stop him. I'm proud of you." I felt tears sting my eyes and blinked them back. When did our daughter become wiser than we are? Probably around the same time we stopped noticing, Laura said with a sad smile. We sat outside until the mosquitoes drove us in, then went to bed without turning on the news or checking our email, or doing any of our normal nighttime routines. We just lay in the dark, holding each other, processing what had happened, and what came next. Monday morning, I drove Brandon to the treatment facility myself. He called Sunday afternoon to ask if I would, and I'd agreed. It was a 2-hour drive north, through farmland and small towns, the kind of rural America that seemed frozen in time. He was quiet for most of the drive, staring out the window at the passing landscape. "Kim's filing for divorce," he said finally, as we passed through a small town with a single stoplight. "Her lawyer called yesterday. I'm sorry." "Are you? You basically destroyed my marriage." "No, Brandon. You destroyed your marriage. I just exposed what you've been hiding." He was quiet again for several miles. "The thing is," he said eventually, "I knew it was wrong. Every time I transferred money, every time I placed a bet, I knew. But I couldn't stop. It was like there was this voice in my head telling me the next one would be different. The next one would be the big win that would fix everything. And I believed it every single time." "That's addiction," I said. "That's what makes it so dangerous. It bypasses your rational mind. Were you really going to press charges if I didn't agree to treatment?" I thought about that question, about the honest answer. Yes, because letting you continue would have been worse. You would have eventually been caught by someone other than me, a vendor, an auditor, or law enforcement. And you would have faced charges anyway, but without the protection of family trying to help you. So this was mercy. This was love. Sometimes they look the same. He thought about that. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "I'm scared of being in there for 60 days, scared of facing what I've done, scared of coming out and having to rebuild everything from nothing." "Good," I said. "Fear means you're taking it seriously. Will you visit?" "Family visiting day is every other weekend. Your mother and I will be there." "What about Melissa?" "That's up to her. She's angry, Brandon. She watched you steal from the family business while she was working her own job and raising her kids and doing everything right. That's going to take time to process." "And Kim?" "I don't know. That's between you two." We pulled into the facility parking lot, a converted estate that looked more like a retreat center than a treatment facility, which was probably intentional. Brandon stared at the building for a long moment. "Thank you for driving me," he said. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. You're my son. That doesn't change because you made terrible choices." He grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat and hesitated. "Dad, I really am sorry. I know I said it at the dinner, but I didn't mean it then. I mean it now. I believe you. Now go in there and do the work. Get better. Come back and rebuild your life. That's how you really apologize." I watched him walk through the front doors, watched the staff greet him and start the intake process through the glass windows. Then I sat in my truck for a few minutes, gathering myself before the long drive home. My phone rang. "Kimberly." "Robert? I heard you're taking Brandon to treatment today. I just dropped him off." "Good." She paused. "I wanted to tell you that I'm not divorcing him because you exposed what he did. I'm divorcing him because he lied to me for 3 years, stole from his family, and destroyed our future together. That's on him, not you. Thank you for saying that. I also wanted to tell you something else. About 6 months ago, Brandon asked me to take out a personal loan in my name. He said it was for home renovations, that we'd pay it back quickly. I almost did it. But something felt off, so I said no. Now I realize he was probably going to use it for gambling." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. How much did he ask for? $30,000. I feel sick thinking about how close I came to saying yes. "You trusted your instincts. That's good. I just wanted you to know. In case there are other debts, other things he hasn't told you about. Be careful, Robert. Check everything." After we hung up, I called Margaret, our accountant. "I need you to do a complete forensic audit. Everything Brandon had access to, every account he touched, every authorization he gave. I want to know the full extent of the damage." "I'll start immediately," she said. Robert, I'm so sorry. I should have caught this sooner. You caught it when you did. That's what matters. Just find out if there's more. There was more. Margaret called me 2 days later with her findings. An additional $68,000 in smaller transactions that had been coded differently, buried in routine operational expenses. Credit cards in the company's name that Brandon had been using for cash advances, another $23,000. Total theft, $338,000. I sat in my office, staring at the numbers, feeling the weight of it settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was systematic, calculated theft over years. This was my son deliberately destroying the legacy his grandfather had built. Tom came over that evening to discuss the legal implications. The additional amount changes things, he said carefully. This pushes it into serious felony territory. Even with restitution and treatment, a prosecutor might not be willing to decline charges. So what do we do? Report it. Document everything. Then we negotiate. Brandon's in treatment, he signed a restitution agreement, and he has no prior criminal record. A good defense attorney might be able to work out a plea deal, probation, supervised restitution, community service. But Robert, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that he might serve some time. How much time? Could be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years, depending on the prosecutor, the judge, and how well his attorney argues mitigation. I called Laura in and explained the situation. She listened quietly, her face pale but composed. Do what you have to do, she said finally. Brandon made these choices. He has to face all the consequences, not just the ones that are convenient. That night, I filed a police report. The detective who took my statement was sympathetic but professional. We'll open an investigation. Given the amount and the family relationship, it'll take some time to process. Your son's in treatment, right? Good. That'll work in his favor when this goes to court. When, not if, I asked. With this much money? Yeah, the DA is going to prosecute. But we'll work with his attorney on timing, try to let him finish treatment before any arrest warrants are issued. The next 60 days were among the hardest of my life. Laura and I visited Brandon on family days, sitting in group therapy sessions where he talked about his addiction, his shame, his fear. He was doing the work, I could see that. But I also knew the legal hammer was still hanging over his head, waiting to fall. Kimberly filed for divorce after the first month. Brandon took it hard, but didn't fight it. She deserves better, he told me during one visit. I destroyed everything good in her life. The least I can do is let her go without making it harder. Melissa visited once, near the end of his stay. She and Brandon talked privately for 2 hours. When she came out, her eyes were red, but her expression calmer. He's genuinely trying, she told me and Laura in the parking lot afterward. I'm still angry, but I can see he's trying. The arrest warrant was issued 3 weeks after Brandon completed his treatment program. His attorney had negotiated the timing, allowing him to turn himself in rather than being picked up at home. The charges: embezzlement, theft, and fraud. Combined, they carried a maximum sentence of 10 years. The plea negotiation took another 6 weeks. Brandon pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony embezzlement in exchange for dropping the other charges. The recommended sentence: 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, full restitution plus penalties and interest, and continued treatment for gambling addiction. At the sentencing hearing, Brandon stood before the judge and read a prepared statement. He took full responsibility, apologized to the family, the company employees, everyone he'd harmed. He talked about his addiction, his treatment, his commitment to being better. The judge listened, then gave him the 18-month sentence, but agreed to allow work release after 6 months if he maintained good behavior. Laura cried when they took him away in handcuffs. I held her in the courthouse hallway while she sobbed against my chest. Melissa stood nearby, her own tears falling silently. He's going to be okay, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Our son is going to prison, Laura said. How did we get here? One bad choice at a time, I replied. And now, one day at a time, he'll work his way back. Brandon served 14 months, getting out early for good behavior. He moved into a halfway house, got a job at a warehouse, and started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. He paid his restitution in small installments, automatically deducted from his paycheck. Kimberly had remarried by the time he got out. She'd moved to Oregon and started fresh. I hoped she'd found happiness. Melissa gradually rebuilt her relationship with Brandon. They had coffee once a month, talk on the phone occasionally. It wasn't what it had been before, but it was something. Laura and I visited him weekly at first, then monthly as he grew more stable. We watched him slowly rebuild his life, piece by difficult piece. 2 years after his release, he called me at work. Dad, I got a job offer. It's in construction management. Good company, decent pay. They know about my record, and they're willing to give me a chance anyway. That's great, Brandon. I'm proud of you. I wanted to ask you something. I know I still owe you and the company about $200,000. At my current payment rate, it'll take another 12 years to pay it off. But with this new job, I could increase the payments, maybe cut that in half. Focus on rebuilding your life first. The money will get paid when it gets paid. Dad, thank you. For everything. For stopping me before I completely destroyed myself. For forcing me into treatment. For not giving up on me, even when I went to prison. Thank you. You're my son, I said simply. That's what fathers do. After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the factory floor. Hastings Manufacturing had survived. We tightened security, implemented better oversight, and recovered most of the stolen money through insurance and restitution. The employees had never lost their jobs. The company my father built would continue for another generation, though probably not through Brandon. But my son had survived too. He'd hit bottom, faced the consequences, and done the work of recovery. He was building something new from the ruins of what he destroyed. That night, Laura and I had dinner at Giovanni's, our actual anniversary, delayed 2 years by everything that had happened. We sat in the same private dining room, just the two of us this time. Do you regret it? She asked. How you handled everything. Exposing him at the dinner, pressing charges, all of it. I thought about that question, really considered it. No. If I hadn't stopped him then, publicly and decisively, he'd have kept going until it was too late. He might have ended up dead from the stress, or in prison for much longer, or so deep in debt to dangerous people that he couldn't climb out. I gave him a hard bottom instead of letting him find an even harder one. That's what the therapist said too, that sometimes love has to be tough. Do you regret it? I regret that it had to happen. I don't regret how you handled it once it was clear what he'd done. She squeezed my hand across the table. We're still here. Still together. Still standing. That's something. That's everything, I corrected. We ordered the same meals we'd ordered 32 years ago on our first anniversary dinner. The pasta was good. The wine was better. And when we cut into the anniversary cake, we smiled at each other. A little sadder, a little wiser, but still together. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for, that you survive the storms, that you make the hard choices even when they hurt, that you love people enough to save them from themselves, even if it means they hate you for a while. Brandon had thrown his credit cards on the table that night at the anniversary dinner, a symbolic surrender that had felt more like defiance than genuine contrition. But those credit cards were long gone now, maxed out and closed years ago. What remained was something harder to see but infinitely more valuable. A son who learned that consequences were real. That accountability mattered. That rock bottom didn't have to be the end of the story. 3 years after Brandon's release, Laura and I were having Sunday breakfast when my phone rang. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. Morning, Dad. Are you busy? Never too busy for you. What's up? I'm standing outside a house, a little ranch in Gresham, about 20 minutes from Portland. 3 bedrooms, decent yard, needs some work but the bones are good. I'm thinking about making an offer. Portland. That's where he'd moved after getting the construction management job, wanting a fresh start somewhere no one knew his story. He'd been renting a small apartment, living simply, sending money to the restitution account every month without fail. That's big news. What changed? A pause. I met someone. Her name is Andrea. She's a teacher, has a 10-year-old daughter. We've been dating for about 8 months, and it's real, Dad. She knows everything about my past. I told her on our 3rd date because I didn't want to build something on lies again. She listened, asked questions, and then said everyone deserves a second chance if they're genuinely trying to be better. Laura had stopped eating, watching my face. I put the phone on speaker so she could hear. That's wonderful, Brandon. Tell us about her. For the next 20 minutes, Brandon talked about Andrea, how they'd met at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting where she'd been supporting a friend, how she'd approached him afterward to say she admired his honesty during the sharing session, how they'd started with coffee and built something real from there. He talked about her daughter Emma, who liked drawing and soccer, and asked him a million questions about construction. He talked about family dinners and school plays and normal, everyday things that sounded like healing. The thing is, he said, his voice uncertain, I want to do this right. Buy a house, build a stable home, maybe eventually get married if she'll have me. But I still owe you and the company $187,000. At my current payment rate, that's another 9 years. I can't ask Andrea to wait that long, and I can't build a life with her while carrying that debt. So I'm calling to ask if we can renegotiate the terms. I looked at Laura. She nodded slightly. What did you have in mind? I asked. The new job pays $95,000 a year. My old payment was $800 a month. I want to increase it to $2,000 a month. That would pay off the debt in about 8 years instead of 9. It would be tight, but I can do it. I've been living on $40,000 a year for the past 3 years. I can keep living like that while building something real. I did the math in my head. Brandon, at $2,000 a month, you'd be paying $24,000 a year. That's a quarter of your income. What about saving for the house? What about emergency funds? What about giving Andrea and Emma a good life? I need to pay back what I stole. That comes first. No, I said firmly. Your recovery comes first. Your stability comes first. Building a healthy life comes first. Dad, I can't just... Listen to me. You've been making payments consistently for 5 years. You've done the work, stayed clean, rebuilt your life piece by piece. The money was always secondary to that. So here's what we're going to do. Keep paying the $800 a month. Use the rest to save for your house, to build a life with Andrea and Emma. When you're settled, when you've got stability and savings, we can revisit the payment plan. Silence on the other end. Dad, I can't let you do that. It's too much. You're not letting me do anything. I'm making a business decision. A debtor who's stable and employed is more likely to pay consistently over time than one who's stretched so thin they might break. This is me protecting my investment. That's bullshit, and you know it. Laura took the phone. Brandon, it's Mom. Your father is right. We want you to have a good life, not spend the next decade punishing yourself. Pay what you've been paying. Build something good. That's how you really make this right, by showing that what happened to you wasn't the end of your story. More silence. Then, I don't deserve you guys. Probably not, Laura said with a smile in her voice. But you're stuck with us anyway. Now tell us more about this house. Does it have a good kitchen? Because I'm already planning Sunday dinners when we come visit. After the call ended, Laura and I sat quietly for a moment. You think we're doing the right thing? I asked. Reducing the pressure on him. I think if we wanted to destroy him, We could have done that 5 years ago. We stopped him, held him accountable, made sure he faced consequences. But we also left him a path back. That's the point, isn't it? Not punishment for its own sake, but rehabilitation. Redemption. When did you get so wise? Probably around the same time you stopped noticing, she said, echoing the words I'd used years ago about Melissa. 6 months later, we flew to Portland for Brandon's wedding. It was small. Andrea's family, a few friends, Melissa and Tom and their kids. No elaborate venue, just a ceremony in Andrea's parents' backyard followed by a barbecue reception. Andrea was lovely, warm and direct, with eyes that seemed to see through pretense. She pulled me aside before the ceremony. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Brandon told me what you did. How you stopped him before the gambling destroyed him completely. How you forced him into treatment and held him accountable. That took courage." "It took necessity," I corrected. He was destroying himself. A lot of parents would have enabled him, covered for him, made excuses. You loved him enough to let him hit bottom, and then helped him climb back up. That's rare. "How much did he tell you?" "Everything. The stealing, the prison time, the divorce, all of it. I needed to know who I was building a life with, and he respected me enough to be honest." She glanced toward where Brandon was talking with Emma, his soon-to-be stepdaughter. "He's a different person than he was back then. He still works his program, still goes to meetings, still does the work every day. That's the man I'm marrying, not who he was, but who he's become." During the ceremony, Brandon's vows included a promise to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. His voice cracked when he talked about Andrea accepting him despite his past, and about Emma trusting him to be part of her life. At the reception, I found myself talking with Andrea's father, a retired school teacher who reminded me of my own father. Practical, straightforward, kind. "Brandon told me about the embezzlement," he said, watching Brandon and Andrea dance their first dance as a married couple. I asked him about it directly. Figured if my daughter was marrying him, I needed to know what kind of man he was. "What did he tell you?" "That he'd made terrible choices, paid the price, and spent every day since trying to be better. That he'd stolen from his family and would be making restitution for years. That he didn't deserve forgiveness but was grateful for it anyway." He took a sip of his beer. "I've taught for 35 years. I've seen kids who make mistakes and learn from them, and kids who make mistakes and blame everyone else. Your son takes responsibility. That matters." He didn't always, I admitted. The night I confronted him, he blamed everyone but himself. But he learned. That's the point. Some people never do. Melissa found me near the dessert table later in the evening. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" We walked to a quiet corner of the yard, away from the music and celebration. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "For what?" "For being angry at you back then, when you exposed Brandon at the anniversary dinner. I thought it was too harsh, too public. I said some things to Tom about how you were being cruel. You were defending your brother. That's natural." "No, I was being naive. I thought family meant protecting each other from consequences. I didn't understand that sometimes love means not protecting someone from what they need to face." She looked toward Brandon, who was dancing with Emma now, the little girl standing on his feet as he waltzed her around. "He would have kept stealing if you hadn't stopped him. He'd be in prison for much longer, or dead, or completely destroyed. You saved his life by being willing to be the villain for a while." "I was never trying to be the villain." "I know. You were trying to be a father. It just took me a while to understand what that really meant." 2 years after the wedding, Brandon called me at the office. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come to Portland?" The seriousness in his voice made me book a flight immediately. I arrived the next day, and Brandon picked me up at the airport. He was quiet during the drive to his house, and I didn't push. Andrea greeted me warmly, but I could see tension in her face. Emma was at school. We sat in their living room, a modest, comfortable space that showed signs of a family building a life together. "I found out something last week," Brandon said without preamble. "Andrea's ex-husband, Emma's father, died 6 months ago. Drug overdose. He'd been in and out of rehab for years, never got clean. Andrea didn't tell me because she didn't want to burden me with it, but his family is now trying to claim that Emma should come live with them. They're threatening a custody battle." "What does Emma want?" I asked. "She wants to stay with us. She barely knew her father. He disappeared from her life when she was 3. Andrea's been raising her alone ever since. But the grandparents are claiming Andrea's unfit because she married someone with a criminal record. They're using my past against us." I felt anger rise in my chest. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" "We're meeting with one tomorrow. But Dad, the legal fees. We don't have that kind of money. We used most of our savings for the house down payment. And I can't ask you for money. Not after everything I took from you." "You're not asking. I'm offering. How much do you need?" "The lawyer said it could be $30,000 or more if it goes to court. We can't afford that. We've been trying to figure out if we can represent ourselves, but—" "Stop. I'm covering it. All of it. You're not losing Emma because of money." "Dad, I can't let you do that." "Yes, you can. Because this isn't about the money I lost 5 years ago. This is about protecting my granddaughter from being taken from the only home she's ever really known." Andrea started crying. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Tell me about these grandparents. What's their angle?" Over the next hour, they explained. The grandparents were wealthy, lived in a large house, and had convinced themselves that they could provide a better life for Emma than Andrea could. They'd ignored Emma for years while their son was alive, but now that he was dead, they wanted to assuage their guilt by rescuing their granddaughter from what they characterized as an unstable home. The next day, I sat in on the meeting with their attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia, who immediately understood the situation. "This is a power play," she said after reviewing the documentation. "They think they can intimidate you with their money and Brandon's criminal record. But Oregon law is very clear. Custody goes to the biological parent unless you can prove unfitness, and being married to someone with a rehabilitated criminal record is an unfitness." "Can we win?" Andrea asked. "Not only can we win decisively. Brandon's record is from nonviolent offenses years ago. He's completed treatment, maintained employment, paid restitution consistently, and by all accounts is a stable presence in Emma's life. Their son, Emma's biological father, abandoned her and died of a drug overdose. Unless they have actual evidence of neglect or abuse, which they clearly don't, they have no case." The custody battle took 4 months to resolve. The grandparents' attorney tried to paint Brandon as a dangerous criminal and Andrea as irresponsible for marrying him. Patricia demolished their arguments with documentation, letters from Brandon's employer, testimonials from his GA sponsor, school records showing Emma thriving academically and emotionally, and a statement from Emma herself about wanting to stay with her mom and Brandon. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. Emma would remain with Andrea. The grandparents were granted supervised visitation once a month if they chose to exercise it. Brandon's past, the judge noted, showed someone who had made mistakes, faced consequences, and rebuilt his life responsibly. Hardly grounds for denying him the right to be a father to his stepdaughter. When Brandon called to tell me about the ruling, I could hear Emma in the background squealing with joy. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you. The legal fees, the time you took off work to testify, everything." "You don't need to thank me. You're my son. Emma's my granddaughter. Family protects family." A pause. "You know, 5 years ago, I threw those credit cards at you in that restaurant. I was so angry, so convinced you were ruining my life. But you saved it. You saved me from myself, and now you've helped me save Emma. I'll never be able to repay you for that. You already are. Every day you stay clean, Every day you're a good husband and father. Every day you live with integrity. That's the repayment. That's all I ever wanted. And those credit cards thrown on the table in anger a decade ago. They were long forgotten, replaced by something far more valuable. A son who had learned that accountability wasn't punishment but liberation, that facing consequences was the path to freedom. And that love sometimes looked like a father brave enough to say no, even when it broke his heart. That was the real anniversary gift. Not 40 years of a perfect marriage, but 40 years of love strong enough to weather any storm, tell any hard truth, and hold on through every dark night until morning came again.